Welcome to the Photo Op Podcast, the photo opinion podcast, where we talk about all things photo and video. I'm your host, Ben Lucas.
And I'm Stuart Merlantis.
And this is Photo Op.
And Video Op. But that's not nice to me.
It doesn't have quite the same ring to it.
Yeah.
I just kind of enjoy the stinger.
It is a good one.
Hopefully we don't get demonetized for putting it on YouTube.
Yeah, I pay to license this song.
So stop it. Stop it.
Claiming.
Stop slapping our videos. Knock it off. Okay.
Yep.
Anywho, today, what are we talking about?
We're talking about old lenses.
Old lenses.
But we also have a special message
The
before
old
lenses.
Yes. So, you may have all of our diehard listeners may have noticed that we've gotten a little bit off the beaten path for weekly scheduling.
What's with that?
What's with that?
We only do this podcast and nothing else in our lives, right?
We're busy. That's the main reason. Also, y'all don't pay us enough. If you would like to pay us more for additional content, you can go to patreon.com/knobcreative.
Pay us to prioritize this.
Pay us to be prepared. Yeah, that's essentially what's happening. So here is the deal. Besides our Patreon subscribers, we make absolutely $0 from this. We are not playing enough on YouTube to get YouTube monetized. We have no sponsors. The sponsor is me and Stuart.
And me. We put our own money into this.
We put our own money into this. So that is just when life comes up and we get jobs and trips and family stuff happening. We unfortunately kind of have to do that. And there's been kind of a lot of family stuff happening for both of us recently.
Yes.
So that just
to put it very mildly,
that just means that we have less time for podcasting and energy. So we are doing our absolute best to create content for all of you and anyone who's ever sent in a question. We absolutely appreciate you. This announcement is not to say that we are going to stop doing this. This announcement is just say for the next couple of months, things are going to be a little bit slow. So enjoy your summer. Maybe go outside, take some photos, make something of your life, and stop waiting for us to post things.
It's not done until we say it's done.
It's not over. It's just might be put on pause with an occasional release.
And this is also for the audience too. I mean, we, as you said, we really appreciate the people that reach out to us, that comment on the videos, or even just that watch, and we can see the little view count number increase. We appreciate that, and in the spirit of that appreciation, we want to let you know if you're like, what the heck, there hasn't been an episode for 3 weeks or whatever.
Just full transparency.
Hey, life stuff happens, and we're going to be honest about that instead of pretending.
Yeah. So there's that. So thank you for bearing with us. In completely unrelated news, in a couple of months here, we'll do an update on how to photograph kids. But for today, let's talk about old lenses. Let's talk about old lenses.
Old lenses.
Yeah. So here's today's question. Is there still a place for old lenses? Do they matter?
Do they matter? Well, that's a different question.
It's a compound question. Have you ever shoplifted or murdered someone?
Is there a place for old lenses? Yes. As an old lens enjoyer myself, there is a place for old lenses. Do they matter? Does anything?
I mean, if you want to get all ennui about it. Okay, so hilarious story that I may or may not have told on this podcast before, but I'm going to do it again. So one of the lenses that we are going to be talking about today is Helios, right? Is that right? Yeah. So once upon a time, Stuart, as a very single bachelor, is like, hey, Ben, I got this new lens. It's super nifty. It's an old vintage Russian lens. I'm like, oh, cool. And he started showing me a bunch of photos from the back of his camera, and it was just this one girl over and over and over again. And I'm like, you like that girl? He's like, no, it's a really nice lens. This lens is great. And that's his wife now.
Yeah, and then I married that girl. So, is there a place for old lenses? Absolutely.
He has a particular penchant for
finds
old
you
lenses.
Partnership. Does it matter? Absolutely.
So when I first started thinking about this episode, I was actually thinking of like, we have so many different like overlays and filters and like what is it that an old lens does that a new lens doesn't? And really it comes down to imperfections. And it's, well, we can add the scratches, we can add the grain, we can add the discolorations, we can add the light leaks. We can add all those things in post.
Yeah.
So what's the point of shooting with old lenses?
Well, I think, at least from my perspective, the stuff added in I don't know. This sounds really hand wavy, but I genuinely feel that this is the case. There is something about imperfections added in post that feels artificial. It's like it's hard to fake imperfections. I think it's hard to make it look really realistic. For example, I mean, these vary in quality, of course, but I've never seen a VHS filter that's been convincing. And I've looked at cheap ones and ones just on apps. I've looked at really expensive ones that you pay hundreds of dollars for, with the intention to use in like a film or something. I've never been convinced. As somebody, I guess, that grew up with VHS, I'm like, I know what VHS imperfections look like, and that's not accurate.
Yeah.
Or that's like too much, or it's too pristine, or it's too, I don't know, robotic in a way. Like it doesn't have the fuzzy analog feel, the truly random imperfections of actual VHS. And so that's kind of the perspective I think that I'm coming from it is I'm just not convinced most of the time.
Well, quick side tangent before I say there are some big name directors and cinematographers that agree with you on that.
Yeah, but I'm not a big name cinematographer.
but the quick side tangent is whenever people talk about like video games with like that 8-bit style like pixel art, you know that 8-bit style was made to look photorealistic because it was displayed on a CRT monitor, and the CRT monitor fuzzed all the edges of the pixels. So they were trying to blend together all these things so that you had photorealism. And now what we do is we're like, no, that's too fuzzy. If you do pixel art, it needs to be harsh contrast. You can see all the pixels. Well, that's because we're looking on LCD screens versus the CRT screens fuzzed all that out and gave you more of a gradient.
It is truly incredible how some of that artwork looks when you look at it on a CRT. And I'm not going to tell you to go find a CRT and display those things, but you can go on YouTube, you can go on Google, you can search for sprite art comparisons on an LCD versus CRT, and it is amazing the depth of
they knew the medium.
Yeah, the depth of the image that comes out as a result of that fuzzing, as a result of those scan lines. Like they really understood and they built it for that specifically. And you really lose a lot by just seeing
got the most
pixels
out of that medium for sure.
Absolutely.
So, but I think that is to say of just like there are things of the time that we want to look, but there are some things that we try and emulate, and there's some things that when we try and emulate them, we're, I guess, emulating what our version of it was. Like any movie that ever depicts the 80s does like all these like neon bright colors, and everyone forgets how brown the 80s were. Right?
I want to make it clear too, scanline filters are a thing. Like CRT scanline filters. True. They're not the same.
No.
I've tried them.
No, they're not.
It doesn't look the same. But yes, the 80s were very brown.
The 80s were so brown. Everything was... My parents had a... I want to call it shag wall carpet. It's this very weird fabric. By the time I was old enough to remember it, it was like peeling at the edges. So it had that...
Okay.
So it was almost like you took a blanket and unwove all the edges.
Oh,
so it was like fuzzy on the edges. But it was like this fabric wallpaper that was like this like kind of mauve green, and literally everything in that house was brown. They had like brown ceiling tiles, like brown wood panels, brown shag carpet, and just brown. Everything's brown. Yeah. But we're like, the 80s, and it's like all these bright colors. That's kind of the first thing I think of when people are like, oh, old pixel art. Yeah. I was like, no, you're doing high contrast. Old pixel art had faded gradients. Yeah. Because of the scan lines.
Yeah.
Anyway,
absolutely.
I got completely off track there, but you were
old
saying
lenses.
Old lenses. There are cinematographers and directors that agree with you. Most recently, we got Dune 2.
Yeah. Huge movie.
In just a little indie flick that you might have heard of. So Dune unit photographer Chiabella Williams told Petapixel that they basically had a strong bond with the cinematographer, and they bonded over this fantastic photography conversation on set about how they were shooting with all of these old lenses.
Yep.
And then the cinematographer was saying that there was actually a problem with whenever he shoots with like Arri Alexa, and he's like, the image sensor is too big and too high fidelity, and we needed to dirty it up and get some grunge. So for a vast majority of Dune 2, they used Russian-made clones of the Zeiss Biotar. So it has a distinctive 13-blade aperture design. They used a Helios 44,
which I have one,
which I believe was the one that we were talking about. Is an f2 prime that delivers a very unique bokeh than any other kind of just open.
It's very
prime.
swirly. Yeah.
Yes. Just look it up for yourself. It's very distinctive and very unique. So
I'm glad I bought one of those when they were mega cheap, because I imagine, I don't know, I haven't looked. I imagine they're like way more expensive now that that's been talked about.
Now I want to Google it, and we'll do it.
Like, what are they, like $500 on eBay now? Should I be selling mine?
Helios 44, 58 mil. Shopping results.
Hopefully they're still cheap, honestly, because
we're looking at like $150.
Okay, so they've tripled in price since I bought them.
It looks like you can buy one from KEH right now for $65, but there's another one for $340. So it ranges depending on the quality.
When I was buying them a decade ago.
It feels bad to say, doesn't it? Yeah.
When I was buying them a decade ago, I think mine was like $40, and that was high priced at the time. Like, that was a pristine version of this, and you could buy them for pretty beat up, but still usable for like $20.
Yeah.
So it's gone up.
A little bit. I mean, everything's gone up. There's that,
true.
But yeah.
Inflation came for the Helios.
Oh, man, didn't it really? But so it's not just Dune 2, Shogun. So this is interesting because you were talking about this earlier, and you were saying like that had to be shot on vintage lenses.
But it wasn't.
It was shot on the Venice 2 with Class X V-Lite T1s. I'm not going to explain any of that. Either you know what I just said or you don't. Yeah. That's fine. But essentially, these are new anamorphic lenses that were designed to look vintage.
Yep. They're designed to be very soft, with like a lot of seeming imperfections. They probably added some too, but that vintage softness and kind of lack of contrast on a certain level, it definitely emulating. I mean, yeah, it's built in lens, it's in hardware for the most part, as far as I know, but definitely emulating vintage lens style.
For sure.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's interesting about this is we're getting to a point where everything's like more detail, higher fidelity, more megapixels, more whatever. And you definitely hit the point of not only diminishing returns, but like overshooting that, where you're like, whoa, back it up, buddy. That is too much detail.
I don't want to see that many pores.
Do you remember the Lord of the Rings? When the Hobbit did the 48 frame rate version.
And
everyone could see all the like everyone could see all of the like makeup stippling and like the wig lines and stuff, which somehow they never noticed in the 24 frame rate version.
Yeah.
But in the 48 frame rate version, people were like, whoa, look at those pores.
It was a choice. Yeah.
It was a choice for sure, but I think that's one of those examples of like they were using like new high fidelity, high quality, super sharp, and you're like, whoa, you overshot it. Now the makeup looks weird.
I'd like to see that high frame rate but low fidelity glass. That would be interesting. I wonder if you could pull that off.
I mean,
yeah.
Can you pull it off? Yes, absolutely. What would it look like? Now that's
like, would it look good?
That's the interesting question.
I don't know.
Okay, well, I've always talked about the kind of like the people who want all those imperfections. I'm like, you're such a hipster. Get out of here. And I will say that like I've kind of come around a little bit on that of like not that I'm necessarily like going out and seeking and trying to like do any of that like cross processing, like my film got left out in the sun or anything like that. I still like my colors to look natural, but there is definitely an appreciation for, this takes place in, let's say, the 1800s.
Yes.
Let's make it look like it was in the 1800s.
So to be clear, I enjoy experimenting with vintage glass. However, I shoot on modern, very clear, very sterile Tamron glass for the vast majority of anything that I ever shoot. But I think what was interesting, at least with Shogun, is you can see what they were going for. I mean, obviously they're new lenses that are made to look old, but that looking old element, this was set hundreds of years ago. You can see that they're sort of pretending or hoping that the audience pretends that like, oh yeah, like this is, if we shot this hundreds of years ago, this is kind of how it would look. I think they go a bit too far personally.
So what? Well, it's also. I mean, it's also a creative choice of like one of the things that we saw in the interview here is that they tuned and detuned lenses until they had the right amount of softness and imperfection for what they were going for. So it's definitely the creative choice of like we don't want it to be so blurry that all of our cinematography is useless, but they're like, we want to, push it a little bit. There's definitely something to be said for taste because we can talk about like how Game of Thrones is like, well, this was supposed to be, viewed in a theater. No one was watching it on a theater. We were all watching it at home in our sweatpants. Yep. And then you made it way too dark that we couldn't see it. And you're like, well, you don't have a QLED, whatever. I'm just like, no one does.
So what? Yeah.
You got to make it for the market, man. You can't. So, there's a little of that to be said. I definitely appreciate some of these things, but yeah, that said of like, I guess I wouldn't want to shoot on one, but that's also just not the style of stuff I shoot. But I definitely kind of love and appreciate some of these older things because it's kind of like with old like Nikkor glass or like the Helios. There are some of these things that even with all of the technology we have, you can't recreate that.
Yep. And it's great in my opinion. It's very cool to use the hardware of the production as its own narrative device, or at least narrative assistant. Like that is great to me. Like there is something to be said for the camera is impartial and it shows things as realistically as it can. That's an option depending on what you're doing. But I'm increasingly kind of like, well, what if it is a performer on some level? What if it has something to say as part of the story that you're telling, right?
I think this was a Wes Anderson movie, but it was super interesting when they were jumping back and forth between different timelines where they had a 4/3 view, and then they had a 69 view, depending on what
the aspect ratio jumping back and forth,
and it's just like, oh, that is super interesting because you're telling a different story and you're having a different framing, and it's all, but it's also forcing, like, it's funny because 4:3 you can force this kind of like claustrophobia when you're cutting off the sides of the screen, but you can also show this kind of like immenseness. Where like when you compare the original Jurassic Park to like the new Jurassic World, when you have the reveal of your big bag dinosaur, right? In the old one, you have 4:3, so you have this very vertical image. So you have the T-Rex just absolutely towering over these tiny people and being like, whoa, that's a big dinosaur. Versus in the 69, to be able to catch the whole thing in the frame, you got to zoom out really far, and you're like, yeah, it's kind of a big dinosaur in a big landscape. Like, all right. And it doesn't have that same kind of like towering feeling that like, so I think there's a lot to be said for making some of those choices that even not like I'm talking about aspect ratio now, but some of those outdated choices make you feel a certain way. And there's something to be said for, okay, why are we shooting it this way? We're only shooting it this way because people's TVs are formatted this way. Okay, but what if the feeling I'm trying to get is this? And so if you're trying to get a different feeling, it's just easier and cheaper to do, and you're trying that vintage equipment,
and you're trying to put people there, right? You're trying to engage the audience theoretically and place them in that, like, reduce the barrier, so to speak, between them and what's happening on screen, really putting them in that experience. And if they feel more like they're in feudal Japan as a result of your lens choice, great, effective narrative choice. If they feel more like they're in, the various eras that you're using those specific aspect ratios for, great, success. Is it an imperfection? Sure, but it's for a purpose. Like it's considered. It's not. I think where that becomes hipsterism is it just done just to be like, oh yeah, look at how like imperfect my lens is. Isn't it cool? Okay, well yeah, you're just a hipster.
Yeah.
But if you're like, hey, I shot this to appear like it's from the 50s in Soviet Russia or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Cool. Okay. Purpose. No longer hipster.
Absolutely. So one shout out I want to do before we close out this episode. So all of the lenses on Dune Part 2 came from a Ukrainian company called Iron Glass Adapters that outfitted all of the old Soviet Helios lens and the Mir 20 and the Mir 1 and the Jupiter 9 portrait primes, just these super old lenses, so that they would work on modern cameras and be able to fill the whole sensor.
Yeah, they're all like M42 thread mounts, I think. Yeah, it's a funky format.
So they converted and outfitted all of these old lenses to be able to work with the modern lens mounts.
Very
so
cool.
it would not have been possible without them. And then they kind of have a quick thing, be like, yeah, and then a war happened and it got kind of hard to get our lenses. But they did fantastic work. Dune 2 is an absolutely gorgeous movie. If you can see it in IMAX, see it. It's not playing in IMAX anymore. We missed the boat on that one. But like, oh my god, it is.
See it on the biggest screen you can.
It is. It is just a beautiful, gorgeous movie. And yeah, shot with kind of all these vintage lenses. And like, I think when it's hipstery is when the imperfections take me out of the story.
Mm-hmm.
When those imperfections set a tone and a mood and they put me into the story, I'm just like, I'm feeling it. Mm-hmm. But when you're like, cool, lens flare, you're like, you're just being a hipster, right?
Every time you watch the new Star Trek films,
a little bit, yeah.
I mean, the new lens flare films.
Yeah. I just thought it was gorgeous and beautiful, and I had to do a deep dive on the lenses because it had a very unique look that you're not seeing in a lot of movies today, because a lot of movies today are CGI fest.
Oh no, you're becoming a hipster, Ben. Oh no. You're appreciating it. That's the first step.
Okay. No. No, it was,
you left that tab open on eBay. I'm going to look at this later.
So before we close out, I also want to talk about Fallout.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because something that Fallout is doing now, I haven't done any research down the rabbit hole to see like, have they used old lenses? But what I have done is I went down the rabbit hole to see how much of it was practical versus CGI.
Oh, interesting.
So like all of the armor is practical. Cool. That they said before there was a director or even like a producer attached to it, the house that was having to do like props was like, we were researching how do we do like the T-49
and you
T-60
can tell
armor,
and you can absolutely tell.
And they're like, yeah, we had a few different versions of it because this one is good for someone who's walking, but this is the one that we needed when we have to pull up the face flap. And they're like, we didn't want to pull an Iron Man and just like CGI the whole thing. So they went and talked to the essentially effects house that did Iron Man and be like, hey, how did you pull together the Iron Man suit so that it was practical? Because they're like
because the original one was practical.
They're like, we want as much of this to be practical as possible. And I think part of having vintage lenses like lends into that of just like, we shot what you are now seeing. We didn't just add a bunch of crap after the fact. There's one shot of Scarlett Johansson running in her Black Widow, and she's just by herself on a green screen because when they were fighting in the airport in one of the Avengers movies, she's the only one that didn't have such heavy CGI that she actually did all the acting. Everyone else was just like mocap.
Yeah, interesting.
So there was a day where she was on set fighting by herself.
That's kind of sad.
Because every other character was just mocapped. Versus you've got Fallout and every character like that is like, of course there's special effects to like remove the ghoul's nose and stuff, but like the rest of that is practical makeup, the rest of that is practical props, the rest of that is good lenses that fit the style and tone.
So what you're saying is vintage lenses let you do it in camera instead of in post.
Pretty much. So just a little bit of appreciation. Yes, there's still place for old lenses. There are filters and editing and overlays and stuff that you can add, but like sometimes it's just fun to, slap an old one on there because it can surprise you in ways that a filter can't surprise you, because a filter is programmed to only do a certain thing the same way every time.
Also, hey, constraints can breed creativity, and working through or around or leaning into that camera's or lens's strengths could help. Yeah.
So this was our deep dive on vintage lenses. We think they're neat.
I just think they're neat.
Thank you so much. We're going to be a little bit slower over the next couple of months of posting. Thank you so much. Stick with us. I promise there will be more content, even if it's not dripping to you every single week. We appreciate all of you that have backed us for 3 years of filming now. Over 2 seasons and a move and a new studio and all of that, all those shenanigans. This is not a goodbye. This is just until we see you next time.
See you next time.
If you have questions or ideas for future episodes, you can email us at hello@photo-op.show.
Watch us on Ben's YouTube channel at NomCreative.
As in Om Nom Nom.
Share this with a friend, and you can listen to Photo Op anywhere podcasts are sold.
Or download it. 'Cause it's free.